This is the new Longines Hydroconquest GMT, and there's so many upgrades from the previous version of the Longines Hydroconquest. In this video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know about this new model, as well as why I think it could be a budget submariner. Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always. And today we have two watches, but we're only going over one. We have the Longines Hydroconquest GMT, which is the new model, and we also have an older version of the Longines Hydroconquest. Now, the reason we've got both of these is so that we can draw some comparisons within this video and also show you everything that's been upgraded in this new model. Let's begin by looking at the basic specs of this new Longines Hydroconquest GMT. So let's pick it up out the Chisholm Hunter watch box, and let's begin with the case diameter. So this comes in at 41 millimeters, and you do have a ton of variants to pick between with this Longines Hydroconquest GMT. You have the black face on the rubber strap, which by the way looks absolutely killer. You need to see it with the rubber strap. For some reason, it just looks like really aggressive, and I really like that. You also have the options of these on NATO straps. You have different dial colors, a green, a kind of brown, which I'm not sure about the brown, and other variations to choose between. That's just a really long-winded way of saying that there's a couple of these out. Now, on the original Hydroconquest, you do have different variations in terms of size, which you don't yet have for this Hydroconquest GMT. And another thing that actually I would prefer just the original Hydroconquest because of is the thickness. So the thickness on the GMT model comes in at roughly 12.9 millimeters, and the original Hydroconquest comes in at 11.9 millimeters. Now this is because of that extra complication that you have on this watch, the GMT functionality. However, I do prefer slimmer watches. I would prefer the Hydroconquest because of that slimness. However, when you take the rest of this watch as a whole, which I'll go over in a second, you'll turn your head towards this watch. And now we get to the weight of this model, and this is being a little bit chunkier of a model, and no links have been removed from it. I'm gonna guess, let's play a game, Drew. I'm gonna guess it's gonna come in at 180 grams, maybe 185. 180 grams, oh my god, I'm not even kidding, I gave it 180 grams. Oh my god. Now let's compare that to the original Longines Hydroconquest. By the way, I get far too excited about this kind of stuff. So, the original Longines Hydroconquest comes in at 181 grams. Now this is interesting because this is technically 1 mil thicker, but the Longines Hydroconquest, the original Hydroconquest, still comes in slightly heavier. I have no idea why, but it's interesting. And now we get to the case and the bracelet of this watch. The bracelet and the case have tons of minor little upgrades that stand this apart from the original Longines Hydroconquest. So firstly, let's take a look at the bracelet. So it has kind of a 3-link bracelet, and it tapers in really nicely. It actually tapers quite aggressively. Now, where the upgrades are is specifically in the clasp. In the original Longines Hydroconquest, you have a little flap and then a deployment clasp after that. The safety latch though, that little flap, it's not my thing. It doesn't feel as premium as a Longines should, and Longines are a brilliant brand. However, this feels premium. It has a safety latch just here, but an added benefit of macro extensions at the bottom here. So you have both options. It looks and feels absolutely brilliant, and it also has a combination of brushed and polished going down the sides to accentuate those lines. Honestly, the bracelet, they've nailed it. Moving on to the case of this watch, and by the way, this comes in stainless steel, if I didn't mention that earlier. The case of this watch is pretty much the same, but where it differs is in the lugs and the crown. Now, when you look at the crown and the lugs of the original Hydroconquest, you'll have kind of a sharp peak to the crown guards. Now, they've kind of tapered this off and curved it a lot more in this new Hydroconquest GMT. They've made it a little bit less aggressive and a little bit less prominent. Now, there's two ways you can look at this. One is that you don't like it because it's less aggressive, but the other is, functionally, when you bend your wrist, it doesn't dig in quite as much to your wrist, and actually, it wears a little bit better. I'm Team GMT here. The crown on this model is obviously a screw down crown. The outer side has polished and it has the Longines logo, or the Longines kind of wings thing. That was really weird. I don't know why I did that. And with that said, before we move on, it is time for the wrist check. What is on your wrist today? Please let me know in the comments. I'm currently rocking the Seiko Peanuts edition. It's a limited edition, picked it up quite recently, and I'm kind of in love with it. By the way, also, I do apologize for my throat. I'm having issues with talking today. I've been squeezing honey into my tea to try and soothe it. Moving on to the face of this model and the other aesthetic parts and details that make it look so much more aggressive and so much more modern to me. So you obviously have quite aggressive teeth around the bezel, and the bezel to turn is pretty damn easy. Remember that this is technically a diving watch that goes to 300 meters water resistance, so if you had big gloves on, you'd pretty easily be able to turn it, and actually, sounds pretty damn good. Now, when you look at the actual ceramic bezel, and that is ceramic bezel, the numbers are extremely clear against that black. So it's white and black. They're the two most contrasting colors. It looks brilliant. Now, you do have different colors to choose from if you wanted the other models. For example, brown, green, blue, whatever you want. Now, the bezel has actually been brought in that little bit further. It's been made that little bit thicker than the previous version of the Hydroconquest. And this kind of gives the dial a little bit more depth. You're looking more into the dial. It's almost like when you have a car and the kind of lights on the car are more slits-like. They're more angry, and it's almost like having eyebrows that are really close together. It looks like they're more aggressive. That's kind of the way that this dial looks to me. Now, the dial itself is in black, and it has orange accents. The GMT hand has an orange arrow, and it has the GMT numbers around the kind of dial, and that kind of draws your eye into the middle and makes it look that little bit more aggressive. It's kind of like having a BMW M Sport with red trimming. It just adds that little bit of aggression. Now, something that I've just thought of that you guys can actually help me with if possible is the reason that it might be thicker is because that dial might sit lower down, and that might give it that more, I don't want to say aggressive again, I've said it like 6 times, but that more masculine look. I think that might be the reason for that dial being that little bit lower and for it being that little bit thicker. Diving deeper into the dial, it has a 3 o'clock date window, and this is accentuated by a white border, so it has kind of a white rectangle round it. I've never been a guy for 3 o'clock date windows. I'm a 6 o'clock date window guy. However, it does look nice. It does look readable. There's not much I can complain about on that front. Now, when we get to the actual hour markers, this is when there's a big difference to the Longines Hydroconquest to my left. The Longines Hydroconquest non-GMT version has big, bold numbers that looks a little bit more playful, and this looks a lot more clean, in my opinion. It has a triangle to mark the 12 o'clock mark, a circle to mark the 6 o'clock mark, and 9 o'clock mark, and other than that, it has little rectangles. All of these indices are marked and filled with superluminova, and the steel hands, the kind of polished hands, stand out wonderfully against that black dial. As you can see here, the lume is in a beautiful blue color, and it has that dot on the bezel, making it a fully functional diver. Now, I have seen brighter lumes than this, but this is pretty good for the price, I have to say. By far, one of the most incredible features on this watch, one of the coolest features on this watch is that outer disc outside where the time is kept with the GMT numbers, because the top half is actually in black and it has orange numerals, so the 24, 2, 4, 6 is in orange. But when it gets to the 6 mark, to the other half of the dial, the color switches to kind of a darker gray, and it kind of slices the number to be a different color. So the 6 actually has half of it in orange, half of it in white, before it goes round to white, and then when it gets to the other half of the dial, it goes to orange. I didn't explain that very well, but on the images, on the pictures, you'll see that. If you want to try on this Longines or any in the Longines range, make sure you head to chisholmhunter.co.uk or one of our 29 stores throughout the UK. This watch obviously goes to depths of 300 meters, very similar, actually it's the same as the last Hydroconquest, and it also has anti-reflective coating on both sides of the sapphire crystal glass. Now, mixed reviews about this. Some people like it, some people think it's a bit of a hazard because it does scratch technically that little bit easier, but from my experience, it doesn't really scratch that easy, unless you're to hit it off a brick or a wall. Normally it's all right. Okay, so we've covered the face, we've covered the dial, we've covered the bracelet, the kind of lugs, all that kind of stuff, but we haven't yet covered the movement of this model. So let's take a look. The movement of this model is of course fully automatic and is the caliber L844. This is a self-winding mechanical movement beating at 25,200 vibrations per hour with a power reserve of up to 72 hours. It also has a GMT hand which reads multiple time zones at the one time, which is pretty good for travelers. There's been a ton of upgrades to this watch. You can see it on the face, you can see it on the bezel, you can see it on the crown guards, you can see it on the crown, you can see it on the bracelet, you can see it on the clasp at the bottom and the macro extension system. There's just so much that's new about this watch. However, with newness, with upgrades, it commands a higher price point. So the price point of this is £2,550. That is with the bracelet. Now, technically speaking, I would get it with the rubber, which might be a little bit lower in terms of price. However, that is the price. It's interesting where Longines have positioned themselves here. They're not as expensive as a Tudor. They're about £1,000 behind a Tudor. And I would prefer this to an Oris, which is kind of the price bracket that they're starting to feed into. I think this is better designed. I think it wears that little bit better. It's not as bulky. I really like this watch. And I think that Longines have taken inspiration from the big players and from, let's say, Rolex, the Submariner. They've taken what works from that and implemented it in their own Longines way, making a pretty killer watch. And that is all from us today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.